everybody. I am Moya Thompson. I am the director and producer for See To It Productions, and I'm hosting this panel discussion to talk about the issue that has been recent in our headlines as it relates to sexual relations with minors, sexual relationships between minors. And I have several persons that I've asked to join in our conversation. One of the persons that we're going to speak to right now is attorney Heather Hunt. A little bit about Heather Hunt, and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself once she begins to speak. But what I have done is I have reached out to persons that I know personally. So most of the persons who are speaking are people that I know personally. I have no desire to have a politically driven conversation to any degree, to bash any particular person. My desire in this discussion is for the protection of children and for the education of Bahamians. I'm a person who has worked with children since 1998 in a professional capacity. And so for me, some of the information that has been shared since that time, I am oblivious to. And so I think this is something that we as a community have to make a conscientious effort to explore, to understand, and to be able to navigate it properly so that we know what the proper channels are when it comes to dealing with minors and that we speak from a place of knowledge. So that's basically all I desire to do because I realize that I am ignorant on certain things as it pertains to this particular topic. And so I want to alleviate some of that ignorance today. So Heather Hunt is someone that I've known when she was Heather Watkins. I met Heather when she was 15 years old. We were both in the National Youth Choir together. In later years, I would end up teaching her daughter. And so she is someone who has volunteered because it honestly has been a bit difficult to get lawyers to speak on this, but specifically, as I've been informed by a number of lawyers, a criminal lawyer would be the best person. I don't know how willing a criminal lawyer is to address it if they may or may not have clients that they may have to represent on this matter. But I am open to hearing from a criminal lawyer still if someone wants to speak to it. But for right now, I am going to use an attorney that I know and trust and believe that she will give a reasonable and clear explanation of what the law states as it relates to several issues that came around this.
First, Moya, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I'm always willing to participate in any forum where persons can be educated about questions pertaining to the law. I am an attorney called to the bar for 13 years. I wouldn't call myself a criminal practitioner, but I have delved in criminal practice in the past. And honestly, because this is a subject I'm passionate about, I think I'm well versed enough to just bring a little bit of clarity to the conversation that's been going on over the past few weeks. And putting it into context, and you did reference the Minister of National Security's comments. It's very difficult to get an understanding of the law by listening to the media snapshots, right, of what the Minister of National Security would have said. And sometimes I think we get inflamed or incensed in the emotions of it without trying to take a step back and just digest what the law says. So hopefully that's the point I'm going to try to get to today. And I think once we go through the law, I think we would understand that although there was some personality and some extra comments, that the media made coverage of, the law really is pretty clear and is very protective of the minor groups, right? So, if I could jump right in, the main thing we need to be focused on is that there is a Sexual Offences Act in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That Sexual Offences Act deals with a whole variety of sexual offenses against women, against men, against children. Certain things that you may not even believe are provided for in that act are there, like even voyeurism, stalking, things of that nature. Well, not stalking in this particular sense, that's in the Domestic Violence Act, but voyeurism is also one where, you know, persons are videotaping you unknown to you. And that's something that people don't even know is provided for in the Sexual Offenses Act. But getting to this particular case that we're talking about, which is the sex of minors, the first thing we have to look to is Section 10 of the Sexual Offenses Act. Okay. And it says that any person who has unlawful sexual intercourse with a person under the age of 14 years of age, whether with their consent or without their consent, they are actually guilty of an offense and they are liable to imprisonment for life. Life in prison is the penalty. So Section 10 is clear. The offense itself is called unlawful sexual intercourse. Now we'll get back to what it's called a bit, unless you want me to stop and stick a pin.
I want you to explain what is unlawful sexual intercourse, what comes under that.
So unlawful sexual intercourse is just that, having sex with someone under the age of 14.
Okay.
Or having sex with someone under the age of 16. So there's two groups of unlawful sexual intercourse. When any person has sex with someone who is 14 or under, that's unlawful sexual intercourse. The penalty is up to life imprisonment, and there is absolutely no defense for the act. So under 14 is a complete indefensible act.
So does in the recent case where the minor was 14, so she wasn't under 14, she was 14.
Right. So she would fall in the second category
of under 16
of unlawful sexual intercourse. So that's Section 11, and it says if they are 14 but under 16, it's still unlawful sexual intercourse. He still is life, but there is an option now for a defense to be raised, okay? And that's the only difference. The difference is when that matter goes to court, the person being charged is 21 or under, okay? And that person can claim to the court or the jury that they had a reasonable reason to believe that the child was older.
Okay.
And the AG in that case has to grant special permission for those cases even to be brought to court. So to break that down, I guess, into layman's terms, a young man or a young person, because, you know, when you're 21, you're still young, right? So there is a defense in that window period to say, look, if you are under 21 and you really had a reason to believe this child was between 14 and 16, basically we'll allow you to raise a defense if this were ever to come before a court. Under 14, absolutely no defense.
Okay.
No matter your age, no matter what. And so I guess that raises another question, and I think we would have talked about it earlier. No matter what your age, even if you're 15 or 16 or 17, and you have sexual intercourse with somebody who's under 14, you're guilty of unlawful sexual intercourse.
So question, if a 16-year-old has relations with a 15-year-old, they are both then breaking the law?
It's both unlawful, that's right.
It applies to teenagers as well? Absolutely.
So first of all, and I know you alluded to it there, we know it commonly as statutory rape. It's not defined as that. I mean, you won't find that particular word in the Sexual Offenses Act, but we've all come over the years to know that and learn that term as statutory rape. But what it really means is that anybody under the age of 16 who has sex either with one another or an older person having sex within that group, it's called an unlawful sexual intercourse. It's just not lawful, it's illegal.
So another person that is crucial within child protection services is the social worker. So there are several people that I am having the conversation with. As an educator myself, other educators has been a big part. I know for me as a teacher, I dealt mostly with younger children as a teacher. I dealt mostly with children that were between the ages of 4 to 6 years old. My experience with teaching teenagers was as with a part of my camp, which is a more short-term program, so you don't really delve into deeply into that. Now, mind you, a lot of my children for my camp, which is a film camp, did tell personal stories, but most of their stories were on things like family, divorce, dealing with divorce, separation of parents, autism, being bullied in school. Those were the kinds of topics that they delved into. Very private, personal matters, but none of the kids that I would have dealt with brought this particular thing to the forefront. Um, and then in my latter years in working in an environment where there were children that may have been brought into that environment because of what may have happened in their home. So I do understand it from that perspective. And I do take umbrage with branding children who may have been broken in or touched inappropriately from a young age and may have and I don't think people realize that every child does not have the same benefit that me or you may have, and they may grow up in an environment where certain things have become the norm. And so when we look at them and we think they're fast or they're forward or they're very sexually forward or whatever the case may be, we're not factoring in what may have happened to them in their home. Now if we're saying, hey,
Mhm.
the home is also to blame, well, then that is something again that as a country we're still responsible for. We're still responsible for them being in a safe environment, an environment that at least allows them to maintain their innocence to some degree. So if you are saying because of the home, blah 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 blah, then it is our responsibility to put them in a safe home if that is the contention. So another person that I spoke to is social services, someone who was actively involved in the social service aspect of it, and that in not necessarily presently she's not with social services, but she has been employed with social services, but she's presently an independent person who
Mhm.
works in a social way with minors. And so she is going to bring her input from that perspective. Also, with here with me is Sania Duncombe,
Mhm.
who is a child advocate in her own right and also a part of like PR and media. And she is here to ask questions and to probe our guests in ways that I may not, I may be thinking one way and she has another question. She may have another question that I didn't think of. She's also someone that has a legal background, as she did study law, even though she didn't pursue it. So those are persons that I have asked to join me. So Emma Bassett,
Mhm.
we welcome you to the floor. Just tell us a
Thank
little
you.
bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, my name is Emma Bassett. I'm a clinical social worker. I have my master's degree in social work. I worked for the Department of Social Services, which Ms. Thompson already said, for 17 years. And then I started my own agency, which is Solutions Counseling Services, basically focusing on family and children, adoption reports, substance abuse programs from a clinical setting. So I've been in the trenches at the department, working with children who are molested, abused, and also statutory rape, all of that. I've worked in the department. I'm also working in my agency and seeing a lot of that also.
So Miss
Uh-huh.
Bassett is someone that I knew. We knew each other from COB when it was
Mhm.
COB. We went to
Yes.
college together, and
Mhm.
so we've been friends since the late '90s.
Mhm.
I knew her from she was started in social services and went off to Tulsa, Oklahoma to get her master's degree,
Mhm.
and came back and was in the trenches of social services. And when she
Yes.
started her own business, so it's been I've known her for a very long time, and I know her passion for this particular field.
Yes.
I guess you can shed some light on, I guess, how I know in social services, I am not, I guess you can tell us if you had encountered any of this as you're working social service. I don't want to speak for you because I do know that at one point you were employed at a specific place.
Mhm.
Um, I guess, and also what are some of your experiences in this particular scenario of a minor being preyed on by an adult, or and that's male or female. So let's be clear. In the news, we've heard a lot of the situations being young girls being preyed on by men, and that's extremely prevalent. But there
Yeah.
are situations of young men being preyed on by older women as well. So we don't want to make it seem as if it's one-sided.
An
And
older
so,
man, an older man.
and oh, right, young
Yes,
boys being preyed on by men as well.
yes. Mhm.
What about young girls being preyed on by older women? Is that also a scenario you've encountered, or just because I know you work a lot with young men now,
Mhm.
young
And
teenagers, young
girls,
teenagers.
yeah.
Oh, you work with
On an
girls as well.
individual basis, boys more in a group setting.
Okay,
Mhm.
so just tell us a little bit about, because a lot of your work is confidential, but just the parts that you can elaborate on as far as
Mhm.
statistically and what are some things that are happening out
Mhm.
there.
Yeah, those from working in the department and also outside of the department, I'm seeing all of the above. All of the above.
Okay.
We're seeing a lot of persons who are teenagers and they're having sexual relations with teenage boys, teenage girls. We're seeing also females, teenagers, older men having sex with teenage girls. Working on the Family Island, I have
Mm-hmm.
seen that a lot. It's okay when people come and gossip about it or come and report it. But as a social worker, a lot of times trying to deal with the case from a legal perspective, that is when all hell broke loose. And then you see that we don't take this very seriously,
Mm-hmm.
in communities, in families. We don't mind gossiping about it, but a lot of times we don't like touching it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's when you really see where our society is at with this particular issue. I've seen a lot of cases also with, and sometimes we close our eyes to this, a lot of cases with young boys who are actually being molested by older men. That's also a case. And I've found that a lot of times in those cases, it's persons who are counseling them, even not even professionally, counseling, but saying, okay, I want to mentor him. Okay. And then mother gets suspicious. She finds love letters. The boy back off and seems like he don't want anything to do with the mentor anymore. And when the questions come out, we find that this older man is actually starting to have sexual relations with the young boy.
Right.
So, and then we're also seeing it from a point of view, which some of the stories that I've heard outside of the profession, just talking with a lot of guys just casually, a lot of them are relating a lot of stories. I guess that was more shocking. I know it was happening, but not to this extent,
Mm-hmm.
where guys have been expressing to me that older females from they were like as young as 7, 8, 9, 10 have fondled them. The babysitters keeping them have fondled them and introduced them to sexual relations at a very, very young age. And that one, I mean, if I didn't know it was true, I would think I'm lying, but this is literally, this is literally more like was a shocker to me, that
Mm-hmm.
the cases that I heard about was so much among friends, among associates, and also clients and persons relating other stories on how guys were at a young age introduced to sex, whether it was intercourse or whether it was just molestation, those type of stuff was an older woman.
What percentage of those young men
Mhm,
saw the problem with what was going on? Because guys, and there's no excuse. Like they have to be told, like, hey, this is wrong. Like this should not have
mhm,
happened to you.
mhm,
But what percentage of those felt violated or felt or understood that, hey, this This, because I was talking to an educator friend of mine. She was previously an administrator, and so I was just trying to, in having the conversation with educators,
Yeah.
what were some of your experiences? Because again, I work with young children, so
Yes.
very young children, so it didn't come up as much.
Mhm.
But she dealt with primary schoolers, and she was saying, she had forgotten about it. About there was a community here where young girls get broken in at fourth grade level, and because she was
Wow.
questioning a child
Wow.
about why the child said they had to leave because the person they walk home with isn't at school. And she said, well, why aren't you, why isn't the person at school? And
Mhm.
she said, oh, well, she got broken in, so whatever the term is
Wow.
they use, but this happened to her, so
You
whatever.
said a community?
It's a community. It's a community. Yeah, I'll just leave it like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a you have like,
Mhm.
sometimes people live in like a,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so
Yeah,
it's a
where
community.
incest is actually almost considered normal.
It's not necessarily incest. It's
Mhm.
the person's in the yard or in the
Yes, in the
space.
community. Mhm. Sometimes relatives,
It
sometimes
is almost
non-relatives.
like that is
Mhm.
what happened. It's literally, that's what happens to you when you get into fourth grade. And that was normal to this
Wow.
child. And so in communicating it to the teacher, the child was like, what's the big deal? Why are you carrying on like this? And
Yeah.
now, and that's another teacher as well, who was in a high school, had told me years ago stories about
Mhm.
children talking about their situation and
Mhm.
being what we know as molested, or as
Mhm.
lawyer, as attorney Heather Hunt said,
Mhm.
unlawful
Uh-huh.
sexual relations with a minor. They didn't know that because that is what they grew up in, and it was something that was happening to them from a young age. And so
Yes.
again, that's why I say in a society we have to understand that if these children grew up
Mhm.
where something is, they're being touched inappropriate from a young age, and they keep getting touched, and that's, they're socialized to become sexual.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
You can't look at them like anything other than, you have to say, okay, this is something that we have to factor in. We can't then brand them as being the
Mhm.
fast girl or
Mm,
the sexually promiscuous child. It's a
right.
child, and that's why adults are
Mhm.
supposed to protect children,
Yes.
whether it's through law, whether it's through reporting adults if we know that they are doing something inappropriate.
Mhm.
And I think part, me having been in the educational system, one of the great concerns I always had was the underfunding of social services. I think because
Mhm.
social services, unlike a lot of other ministries, can't strike for more money,
Yeah.
because nobody cares. Like
Yeah.
if a social worker don't go to work for 2 weeks, nobody cares.
Mhm.
They're not like a
Mhm.
teacher. If the teacher doesn't go to work, if BEC, if a BPL
Mhm.
people say they don't want to go to work, like now, right now we're talking about the gas station shutting down. If that happens, people are
Mhm.
paralyzed, but nobody cares if the
Yeah.
social worker doesn't go to work. So
Mhm.
it's difficult for them to get more money, more funding, paid
Mhm.
better. And I think that is definitely something that as a
It
country,
is.
we have to start
Mhm.
examining. We really have to pay, especially like your degree. A number of social workers are degreed,
Mhm.
bachelor's, associates, masters. We have to start paying people their value and giving them the resources to do their job properly.
Mhm.
But you can continue in terms of what you would say.
Yeah, and like you said, I think one of the questions that you started to ask was in regards to these things that are happening. Sometimes people are actually thinking, teenagers are thinking, teenage children thinking that this is normal.
This is normal.
This is normal. I always remember this example. Working in a group setting, young teenage boys, no one was 18. Everybody was like 16. And this 16, 17-year-old was on his second child. Okay, second child, of course, with a minor. Of course, it was a minor girl,
Mm-hmm.
minor girls. Okay, the second time. And I remember us talking about, because we talk a lot about how your body is valuable. Sex is something to be taken seriously, not to be ventured in as a child. So
Right.
we basically talk a lot about, your body is to be preserved, you know what I mean? And also as young man in the group, that you look at girls in the way that you want a man to look at your daughter in the future. Okay, so we talk about that. And I remember one of the things that we said was that culturally, a lot of times, men are like when they turn a certain age or, you know, I'd say 16 and above, a lot of times they feel that this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to look at a girl and, you know, I'm supposed to just basically eventually have sex. Like, if that's tomorrow or if that's today, you see what I'm saying? But that
Is it
the
as old as
goal.
16? Is it as old as 16 though?
Well,
Is it not younger?
it is younger, but I'm trying to stay where people can actually take this conversation. Because sometimes, you know, when you go really young, oh no, that's a bit extreme. But it is younger also, because we've
I
got
think
14-year-old,
so.
13-year-olds, and this is the attitude that they have. You know, you see them on the road, you know what I mean? Hey, sexy, you know what I want to do with you. So we had a conversation that this is not the way for young men to live. That is not the appropriate way. Okay. So when one of the guys, he said, but I thought that's what men are supposed to do, like our age, you know, young men going into adult. I thought that's what we're supposed to do. Now, honestly and truly, I took it as a joke. I thought he was joking. The other facilitators thought he was kidding, and everybody in the group thought he was joking. So you know, like you have to start laughing, and then I turn around, I look at him, and he was serious.
He was shocked. He was like, "What y'all laughing at?"
Yeah, like right. He was very serious. I asked again. I said, who told you that? He said, my dad. He said, my dad said, you look at a girl, you have sex that make you a man. The more girls you have sex with, and it like, although he was totally honest. It literally, I said, do you think this is right or wrong? He said, right, because this is what men are supposed to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, we went, of course, after the shock factor left, you know what I mean? We explained, you know, like how this is something that when you're moving in a society as a young man, this is something that is important, sex. You know, women are important. You know, having appropriate relationships is important, other than just going to the goal that, hey, I want to take down as much girls that I can because this makes me a man. So we went through that process, but literally I realized how much other young men who wasn't saying it believed the same thing.
And I will say, from the experience that I had with working with teenagers and having these conversations with them, this is I'm not shocked, this is their perception. In addition to, my concern was their lack of knowledge of how their body worked. So just basic biology, they did not know. But they were engaging in sex. And then when you ask them a question, like you not even really knowing how, like you do know penis, vagina, whatever, but you don't necessarily know this is how your body works, and this is how you create babies and create life. A female engaging in sex but not knowing, hey, this is what causes a period. These are the things. And to your point too about male mentors, right? Because I'm a huge believer in a lot of our boys need positive male mentors. In particular, because we are so inundated with women in school, women in social work, women here. And so I'm a huge advocate for male mentors. But it is like, I almost like, in having this conversation, is almost like you have to be wary. And I'm, you know, like, because even I remember there being a discussion, right? About the third, and if you remember the four, the referendum with the four thingum, right? And the third one was in reference to fathers, which was something that was close to me because I'm a product of a non, at the time, a non-Bahamian mother and a Bahamian father who weren't married. So I was declared at the time a non-national at birth, and then I had to apply for citizenship because my dad, even though my dad was a Bahamian, right? So I identified with, I was like, and you know, one of the things they said was that my dad should have adopted me, which I was like, what do you mean my dad should adopt me? That's my dad. Like, why would he adopt me?
But a lot of people doing that now. Yes.
Right.
So,
so I remember the conversation about the adoption part, and them saying that outside of your father, your actual father, I don't know how it is now, but they don't really adopt kids out to men. And I took a little umbrage with that. I was like, well, why not? Why? Blah, blah, blah. But now having this conversation and seeing what we're dealing with, I guess they know, and this is not to say
we don't have any good men. What I am saying is that you have to be so very careful, I guess, with who is chosen to work with children, and who is chosen to adopt children, and who is chosen to I guess foster children. But I do still feel strongly about the necessity for positive male mentors who can I guess guide young men. And I don't, it's like I feel like we're in a conundrum because they need these myths dispelled about what they believe manhood is.
One of the things that people are not really thinking about, actually, I can't say that, but I assume that people are not thinking about is right now in this age, there is unfiltered access to pornography.
That
Anywhere
too.
you go, you know, and
Yes.
it's not uncommon. People buy their kids phones for school and to home, just to have for Christmas, birthdays.
And especially now with the COVID and children having to be online,
Right.
that's part of
The
another reason
reality
why
is
children have,
you can, and I don't know how many parents take the time to go through a device and look at all the safety settings, but beyond just the device safety settings are the apps themselves, right? There's very little waste. An app like Facebook has whole companies dedicated to just filtering out content and reviewing content. And even that is still not enough for the type of content that comes through. You as adults see it. Sometimes you see something like,
Yeah.
what these
Wow.
people doing? Right.
Yeah.
Now, we're adults. And so it's said that we're at that developmental age where we understand how things work. We see, imagine that type of constant access for someone who the law has designated as not an adult, as not having the mental capacity to make decisions for themselves. Yet they are learning almost explicitly about sex through not just peers like we probably would have learned, outside of talking to your parents if you had that relationship, but from Pornhub, from Facebook, from YouTube, from wherever they can find it. And at most times, sometimes it's finding them.
Right.
And I feel like that's something that leads to that conversation happening, which is why is, I took umbrage when he said that, this is the most over-sexualized generation of people, when the reality is, you know what? I think it's the most sexually exposed generation of people. I don't think people are more oversexed than they've been. All of us had to go through puberty. We all grew up. It's just the things that we had access to and how we found out about sex, how we found out about relationships is so different than how kids right now, anybody under the age of 15, 16 right now, is finding out about sex. Most of them, I can't even imagine what their first view of sex would have been through a phone.
Right.
There was a study done a couple of years ago. I haven't looked at the recent ranking, but a few years ago, Pornhub was one of the top ranking websites in the Bahamas.
Oh, wow.
And if you break down the demographics of that, you would be shocked to find out that
age?
the biggest age is not 35 to 40 something. It's under that.
Yeah.
And they have that unfiltered access. So how do you then, they see that there, and then they go on Facebook again and the media, and they see it saying, oh, well, we're essentially throwing that blame on oversexed children for them being in these situations. It's like, so, well, what do you want them to do? Where would you like them to turn in an instance like this?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that was a challenge for me in that, just from the perspective of how do we, in regards to what Ms. Hunt said, being there is no defense if you're under 14, and you can present a defense to 14 to 16. So I guess I would be more curious to know what was the defense. Was this an incapacitated 40-year-old? Were they drugged? Were they bound with chains to the bed and forced? Was this, when I say incapacitated, meaning a special needs person, was this a special needs 40-year-old that has the mind of a child, and so that is the reason why if this was a able-bodied, able-minded 40-year-old person and they were not bound, they were not drugged and taken advantage of in that way, that I don't understand. I didn't understand the the AG being against the plea deal and saying that that was something that he would not have advised a client to take. Based on what then?
I would also put some of the, I guess, you'd also kind of have to lay it at the feet of this. In media has also changed in the past few years. It's not just the newspaper anymore, websites, Facebook, etc. Because a lot of these sites are monetized. They have ways for you to book ad revenue, to book ads, so it counts as ad revenue. For them to rank on sites, especially like with Google ranking, Bing ranking, they sell that space. Those spaces are able to be sold. So what they need is for you to be able to visit. They want you to visit that website. They want you to keep visiting. They want to rank higher than the other sites. And so unfortunately, news has become rather sensationalized. You know, because they pay, I mean, it's the same thing, it's a job. And once you put money behind anything, the goal is always going to be, how do we get more money? They are going to, their headlines are going to be more sensational. The Facebook caption is going to be a little bit more, because they want you to click it. They want you to click it and they want you to read it. Right. You have already gone into that article incensed because all you saw is 40-year-old man given plea deal in sex case, whatever, you know what I mean? You know how it's written. So you've already kind of made up your mind before you even click that button. I then mad. You go in the article, you know what I mean? You read it. And sometimes you read and you don't realize that you are not getting all of the information in that article. You're getting what they deem important in a sense. That's not going to be all the information. And sometimes you have to sit and dig deeper to find out. Most people aren't going to do that. Right. Because they've already pressed share before they even click the link. Yeah. Before they click that link and read that article, they already shared with the caption, oh my God, this country, blah, 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 right? And I think it's almost like a weapon when you really look at it, because nobody's gonna do the dirt or do the work to find out, and that work will often go beyond looking at the website. They'll have to go and look up the case, whatever information is public. They may have to go and sit in to hear about, you know what I mean? But it's social commentary.
And so that is what annoyed me, I think, about it, was that I did click on the article. I am a person who's going to click on the article. And usually when you click on the article, it'll say this is a 1-minute read. And I was like, okay, so this ain't gonna really be saying nothing. It's not, I don't know, it's the article is not giving me the meat and the potatoes. It is not telling me why the man got a low plea or a 4-year plea deal on a plea deal that should have been a lifelong one. It's not saying, and I'm figuring, well, it is the media's job in that instance to share the details of what the case, whatever we could share, because we know it's a minor, so there's certain things you can't say because of the minor, but you can say what was if you're going to say, if it's going to be said, the reason this plea deal was made possible was because of extenuating circumstances. Now, my issue is what they said was the circumstances was the child was sexualized in the society, this, that, and the next thing. Okay, so what in our law allows for that? Yeah. That what you're saying. What does sexualization of the minor child have to do with anything? Because we all understand our social services. And again, I'm gonna bring it back to Emma. Sorry, Ms. Bassett. I'm gonna bring it back to Ms. Bassett to say, well, in your experience, I guess, from working with social services, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, if you can say 2 to 3 minutes, to say what were some of the challenges, I guess, with tackling some of these issues. Based on whether your personal experience or experience of persons you worked with, what were some of the challenges of tackling? I have some idea because I've spoken to some people, but just tell me, I guess, what were some of the challenges?
Some of the red tape, that's one.
What's red tape? What was
red
happening?
Tape? The whole investigation process. Sometimes it's very tedious. Sometimes a person would report a case, and then when you go in, the very same person is saying a different story. Okay, the person is saying
the person that is
the adult. the adult who reported the case in
Oh.
a lot of situations, okay?
Mhm.
Because it's usually, most of the time it's an adult, reporting the cases to social services,
Okay.
okay? In regards to,
Which the
mhm.
adults, the adults that you have encountered, have they been school-related adults? Have they been neighborhood adults? Like, what was the majority complaints came from? Who? Neighborhood people, family people? I guess family.
Oh,
Was it mostly
family,
family?
all of the above that you just said, family, neighbors, and then persons who just, like persons from church who would suspect something, godparents, just people who sometimes just passing, they maybe live on the other street, but they're passing the house and they're hearing, they're hearing these things, and you'd be like, well, only this person, this is a minor. So they send a report into the police or social services, okay? Yeah, so a lot of times that's one of the hindrance, because sometimes the case, when you go in to actually investigate, is a lot of distortion of the information, okay? So you go in and sometimes you can't get information from the minor, okay? Because the minor don't want to say who it was. That happens a lot. The parents may not know who it is. Okay, and then also too, remember, a lot of people are resistant to things going to court. So sometimes too, they just don't want a court case. Right. They want them to die on the street like a dog. Okay, they want the perpetrator. That's that's in their mind. Behaviors are at a certain point, God can get you. You see what I'm saying? But basically, so they want
not me. I ain't do it. I ain't gonna be the one to get you. I ain't do my part.
Right. They don't want this court case. Yes. So they don't want this whole procedure. So sometimes you have a lot of things that were reported. Now everybody's tight-lipped, so you're trying to get through the information. It takes such a long time. Persons aren't forthcoming of the information. Okay. So then you have cases that go in, through the system, and then it actually goes through, the child is cleared medically, the hymen may not be intact. It goes on to the police station, the attorney general's office, and then sometimes you don't really hear anything about maybe the case anymore, maybe it didn't go to court. So it's a lot of things. As a social worker, I guess it would be, not I guess, it is frustrating, because you start a process and you want to see the end of this process. Sometimes maybe the information came back, but maybe as a social worker, you didn't get the information on what really happened with the case. And of course, some cases as a social worker, you're very passionate about. So you'd really like to see that something has happened in regards to this child being taken care of and justice being given to this particular child. So you have some issues here and there, sometimes high caseload, and also even in my private practice, I would say more, because I could talk freely about my private practice and things that I'm seeing also, is that because sometimes in our society, and this is something that it's very hard for me to talk about because I get very passionate about it. Sometimes it's hard for me to contain my composure when I talk about it, is that a lot of times I don't think we take it very seriously, this issue very seriously. So you hear these frivolous comments. Oh, well, you know what I mean? She probably was looking for it. Children will have sex. This is normal. This is something that they will do. It's almost like they're making it sound like every child in the world will have to have sex lest they die before they're 18. And then when I think back, I was like, we had groups in school that was anti having sex in school, and we stuck to that. We had a lot of support with it. We supported each other. We talked about how our bodies were precious. We literally had a group. See,
now here's what I will say to that, because you and I had this conversation, and I spoke about it from which is what I said, which is, and I know you're not talking about me necessarily, but we had this conversation where the perspective that I bring with that is that because I think, and I guess I'm free to say this, you grew up from a Christian home and a Christian background, as did I, right? So there was a certain the challenges that you always have to deal with other people as if this is not the background you grew up in, where this is important to you, where chastity is not important to you, or whatever, for whatever reason, that's not something. So just developmentally, just speaking from a developmental, whatever, I usually just say puberty happens at that age. And so there are feelings and there are whatever else. Not saying that, oh, you have to have sex or you die if you don't have sex. But I understand inter-teen, like a teen and a teen. But again, one of the things that the lawyer said, the attorney said, is that even within the teens, it's still against the law.
It's still
like
illegal.
Yes, a 15-year-old and 14-year-old, it's still illegal on both ends. And I guess
for a reason. Yeah,
right.
For a reason. Yeah, because remember, it's still developing. You're going through puberty. It doesn't mean that because, and see, we sometimes create I call it a dog-like mentality, where you know the dogs do. They see the woman, they sniff, and then the female dog, and then wherever it happens, it happens. Okay, so when it comes to us as humans, that's where parenting comes in. We teach our children that you will have these feelings. That's normal. You will have sexual feelings when you hit puberty. Okay, you will have it. Some
but
kids
self-control.
Okay,
understanding you're not ready for it. You're not ready for the repercussions of it. Those kinds of things. Because at any given time, pregnancy is a possibility.
STD.
Birth control for teenagers, I think birth controls for adults can be very complicated and hazardous and all that kind of stuff. So again, I guess it would be it could be in alignment with drinking as a child versus drinking as an adult, where you are you should be able or be expected to be able to handle the repercussions of what you're doing.
Yes.
If you drink, you should know that this is you should eat before you do it. So whatever the case may be, or you shouldn't drive or whatever the case may be. So yes, I do understand. Yeah.
But the whole thing is illegal because the child's brain is still developing. Her body is still her body is still developing. You are not at the point of maturity where sex can a lot of times even be done responsibly. And even if it is not consistent. And you can tell me all you want that you teach teenagers to use a condom, even teaching adults that 1 or 2 times is a oops. Okay. So when it comes to that, this is something to be dealt with in maturity. And you're teaching kids now that the focus right now, when you have how to have appropriate relationships. You could like a boy. Yes, this will happen to you when you like a boy, when you like a girl, you will have these feelings. You are a human being. You're a child. Those feelings will come, but this is how you can handle it. This is how you can use self-control. This is how you can refocus. This is how you can go out, but you can still be able to say, this is something that I want to avoid this area because I know this area will be an area of temptation for me with another girl.
Question. Who would you say is responsible for teaching this if they don't have the parents?
It should happen. It should. It should happen in the home. I mean, we all know that it should. That's where you live. Right? It should. But we all know that in this society, that will most likely not happen in a great percentage of homes. Okay? We know that. Okay? We know that. So we have the school setting. So we have to start getting creative. We have to start taking this issue serious and be creative. We have the school setting. We have courses that we need to start telling girls and guys that it's worth waiting for, the emotional effects of sex, the physical effects that it can have, why it isn't recommended even legally at your age, and the things that you can focus at this time, and also how you can use self-control and how it helps you to make good decisions also when you're adult. Because when you start making good decisions as a child in regards to this, as a teenager, then as an adult, you start making good decisions even in other areas of your life. Because you understand the importance of making good decisions and waiting and not just moving with feelings. So those open discussions are so important. Why are we not having these open discussions?
And I was gonna say, okay, so what I would say is from an early childhood perspective, the conversations we had, that was a part of our curriculum, right? The conversations we had were good touch, bad touch. And so we talked to them about, we had the dolls, and we had the dolls that had the body parts that looked like the body parts. And we would say, this is not, no one is supposed to touch you here. And this is what you should do if anybody touches you in a place where you're not comfortable. That's the conversation we had with our younger children.
Yes.
I don't know. And I taught, for most of my teaching career, I taught in an environment that was specifically early learning. I taught government and private, but I was in a specifically early learning setting, as opposed to say I was in a primary school for about 2 years, where preschool was attached, and then there were other segments of time where I would have done a supply teacher stint and was substituting at different schools for like 2 months or whatever not, where the schools are attached to primary school. But I honestly don't know what they teach in the primary school and whether it's an ongoing conversation. But I do know dealing with a child in a teenager that I worked with in my last employ, where we were having the conversation, and the child did not know, she did not understand that the egg is released and that's why she has the period. And I said, wow, somebody should have taught you this. Like I felt like some teacher
you should have gotten it somewhere.
Because I got it in 6th grade. I got it in 6th grade. Shout out to Palmdale Primary. They took us all in a room, all the girls, and they talked to us about what's going to happen to our bodies. And they said, you're going to have, you're going to get your period. I was never shocked when I started, and after that, there were 2 girls that saw their period, and it happened to me in high school, but I was already aware this is going to happen to me. A lot of our kids, they are, like Sania said, exposed to porn from a young age, but still don't know how their body works and the inner workings of their body, like biologically don't know this is what's happening. And so I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's, I think certain things are almost at the will and the whim of the specific administrator, because that was something I learned too, and just talking to teachers. It's like, you may have a good administrator, or you may have a school, like I went to a school that I thought was one of the best schools, and that was what they did. I don't know that that's a standard thing that is said to all primary schools. You must do this when the child is in grade 6.
In grade 6, I know we did it. I remember that talk. I remember the girls went in one room. When my parents got to tell me about the birds and bees, I was looking at them like, seriously? We already found that out in grade 6. Okay, we're now in grade 7. So I was like, okay.
You were just pretend to be interested. So when did you learn if you would look? Heather is back, so we're going to give her a minute to, we're going to come to you in a minute, Heather. To finish going over the legal aspect. But Sania, when do you remember? Now, Sania, you were in the private school system, so I don't know if how did they tackle it?
Well, private and Catholic. I honestly remember having the conversation. I cannot remember the age that it happened, where we had the same thing. All the girls went into a room separate, and then we had this conversation, and a nurse was there. And she had the conversation with us. But my mother did a lot of that conversation with me, to the point where I was like, Jesus, mommy, could you please stop talking about this? Yeah. She did a lot. She had the conversation with me. She made me read this book. I'll never forget that book for as long as I live. I could get that book out of a lineup. It was basically this book it was an illustrated book, and it went over everything. Like,
with the little fat couple?
With the little fat couple, yes.
I remember that book.
And we went, and it did everything. It covered period, it covered the birds and the bees, it covered sexual development, it covered what happened during sex, how babies came about, all of that stuff. And when I first got my period, my mother made me read that book. I stayed home from school that day. We read that book. She let me read it. Then we read it together. And then she let me ask questions. So by the time we got to, although I'm sure that the school had that conversation because it was along the lines too of hygiene. So I feel like we had that talk in primary school before I had that talk with my mom. What this conversation needs is the same PR, I guess, that the mental health community is now getting.
Yes.
These are not things anymore that can be hidden. Like, this isn't a hidden conversation anymore. This isn't something to shy away from. The more, Miss Barnett,
Bassett.
Bassett,
Sorry.
sorry.
You can't be calling the wrong name.
Yeah. The more, Ms. Bassett, the more you speak about what is happening and the fact that it just sounds like, okay, you don't know if you can rely on the parents, because the parents themselves may have been victims of things, or in communities where they thought this stuff was normal, and now they're the adults and they don't care. Nobody cared for them, so they don't care. I don't know what's happening more, like you said, in schools. So now I think it's just up to us, people, period, to say, listen, the same way that mental health conversations are very public now, it's okay to talk about mental health. We need to encourage people to talk about mental health. Psychologists are doing their own things. From a media and from a personality standpoint, this is the type of conversations this is the type of content that needs to start to be developed. Hey, listen, nobody may have told you about sex. I'm telling you about sex. Call me your big sister. Nobody told you that it's not okay for a 30-year-old man to be coming on to you. There's absolutely nothing that you could do for a 30-year-old man. I'm telling you that this is what it is. People, psychologists, it's been studied, countless diverse studies about the fact that the age of maturity is actually 25, and well into your 20s, you could still be maturing. But for the sake of, right. But for the sake of just capacity, we're saying the age of adults is the age of
21.
Considered adult is 21, 18, 21. But that doesn't mean that up here you're ready for the complexities that may come behind this adult relationship. Maybe it's somebody that you trust putting you in situations that you shouldn't be in, because you read the conversations, you look at social media, how many times you see, oh, well, it's, the mother's encouraging this, the mother's selling some of these girls into this X, Y, and Z. So I think this is showing me is that this conversation now needs to be continued by all of us. Like, everybody in that space who knows. I don't know if anybody's talking to you about this stuff, but I'm going to talk to you about this stuff.
Even you saying that with the, where we are, okay, it's the mother's fault, okay, it's the parents' fault, or they selling them, and so then if that is the issue, if the issue is the parent, like I said earlier, then why doesn't the law then step in and say, well, okay, this is what's happening? So Heather?
At this moment, there are laws on the books that relate to neglect, child neglect. You would have recalled recently in one of the highly publicized cases a few months ago, a mother was charged, although she wasn't the one that was particularly guilty of the acts against the child. She would have been charged with endangering a child. And I know social services also has ability to report, and there are consequences for parents in the law. So it's not like the law is, or, parents have no consequences. But the reality of it is, once you hit a certain age, that's why the consent is such an important thing, because at the end of the day, once you hit 16, really and truly, you can do whatever you want with your body. And so there are no consequences after that point. But for actual unlawful sexual intercourse, like we were discussing, that particular offense, really the person who gets reprimanded by the law is the perpetrator. And I think that's how it should be, because at the end of the day, I know as parents, we have to be accountable where our children are. Sometimes, we let them slip through the crack. But the reality is, notwithstanding what happens with the parent and the child, I think the perpetrator is the one who knows that they're going after a person who's under the age of 16. And that's why I think the penalty is so harsh. The penalty is life, up to life in prison, because they are the person that knows that, or ought to know, that they shouldn't be going after a child at that age.
Well, can I ask this hypothetically? What are some conditions under which someone would get a plea deal for 4 years? Like, what are something, like I suggested earlier in conversation, that was this was this 40, in the case of the 40-year-old and the 14-year-old, was this a situation of a man that was incapacitated in terms of he is mentally challenged?
Mentally
Yes, well,
challenged.
yeah, and
Mentally
the act talks
challenged
about
was
mental disabled. Yeah.
was that a situation? Was that so a mentally disabled person or someone who's drugged? I was like, well, what could be the scenario? So, like you said, a mentally disabled person could kind of get some leeway with it, is what you're saying.
Right. So there are several defenses. I mean, in this, well, first of all, let me repeat what I said earlier. So under Section 10, if a person is under 14, there's absolutely no defense. It's indefensible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, However, you have certain things like mental incapacity, and that could be temporary. Someone can argue that they were drunk and didn't know what they were doing, and that would be a factor that's put into consideration
Right.
when it comes to sentencing, but it doesn't give them an absolute defense to make them not guilty, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there are things like that that can be taken into consideration. But one thing that also has to be taken into consideration is plea deals are made before trials, right? A trial means that you have a jury who has to sit down and hear everything and hear all of the evidence. And oftentimes, and I don't know if it was the case in this case, but oftentimes a decision is made as to, okay, when these 12 persons sit down and hear all sides of the story, can we get a conviction? Are they going to sympathize with one person or the other for reasons that we as the public will never ever know? So that's a critical thing that we need to be thinking about as a public. When you hear a plea deal happens, you have to just remember that there's so many factors that we have to consider when you hear that there's a plea deal reached.
So does that mean that they didn't really go to, they didn't have a trial, they just came up with a plea deal?
That's correct. So he pled guilty right away. And that's always too, that is also something that the court always takes into consideration. So basically you're owning up to what happened.
So when
There's no
the
reason to
AG
prove you
said
guilty.
he would not have allowed him to take the plea deal, was he saying then that he would have taken it to trial? Is that what he meant?
I guess, yes. Well, that's how I interpreted it. I mean, he is defense counsel,
Mm-hmm.
and he probably would say to him, well, I would have taken my chances with the jury.
Okay.
Because
See, that's how
too much.
that's how it happens in real life, you see, because those 12 people, when you get a jury of your peers, you get a cross section of society.
Mm-hmm.
And we would never ever know the stories that would have come out in that trial, that would either cause them to sympathize with one or the other, or say, you know what, um, notwithstanding the age, this was kind of something that everybody walked into with their eyes open, so maybe we shouldn't punish him um, for this much time. Who knows what could happen when a matter gets in front of the 12 jurymen or women. So you are at a point where you have a person who says they are guilty, they admit, and so you get them behind bars. And 4 years is a lot of time to disrupt someone's life and make them think about what they've done. Although the act does say up to life, so I'm not saying that, um, you know, that he shouldn't have gotten more time either. But the reality is, 4 years is not. For example, the $500 and the few months that someone got the other day for French kissing the little boy.
Oh dear.
This is a serious situation.
It's kind of,
I have a question. He made reference to
Sounds so bleak.
somebody said, Heather, he made reference, somebody said something about, oh, well, the age of consent is 14, and he said, well, technically, you can give consent down to 7. What could he have been referencing in that instance? Because according to the law, it says your child cannot give consent. However, and I know you're not a criminal lawyer, so is there what could he have been referencing? Because that disturbed me. Okay.
Whether you're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to 14, it's the same position. So it's not going to be any worse or better under the law if basically the age is 14, under the age of 14. So if, the most heinous case for someone who is 6 and 7 and 8 years old, it doesn't change what the offense is. I think that's the point he's trying to make. So consent really has nothing to do with it. It's still an unlawful sexual intercourse, and the penalty is still life. And so bringing whether the child can consent or not into it makes no difference. And I think that's what
you
I
hope he
would
was
believe
trying
that
to
that's what he
say.
meant.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it is. That's what the law says. So there's no threshold or no different rule that applies for a younger age. It's one set thing. Under the age of 14, still unlawful sexual intercourse, you're still liable to get up to life imprisonment. And it doesn't matter whether they consent or not, because there's really no such thing as consent, basically,
Right.
under the age
Right.
of
So
14.
13 and under. So it's probably best to say 13 and under, because when people hear 14, they're still gonna think.
Right.
And so when we talk about the 4 years and factoring in that the child would have gotten pregnant, can you shed some light on that, Ms. Bassett, again? Like, go back to that situation or situations that are similar, whether it's boys or young ladies, young men or young ladies or young men, in terms of them being parents at such a young age.
Well, is a few things that's going through my head, because in my opinion, if it's statutory or unlawful sex is unlawful sex, whether you're pregnant or not. I think it should just be treated all across the board the same.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So that's my thing. And it's a matter that should be taken seriously, whether the person gets pregnant or not.
Okay. True.
Okay. Now we do have, in regards to teenage pregnancy, yes, we do have a number. I don't know the statistics now. We do have a number of teenagers that have babies. The core of the matter, we always go back to sex and minors.
Right.
And I think, to be honest with you, I am going to bring this point dry that we are doing a very good job teaching
And educating
children and educating.
Mm-hmm.
We do good with saying, okay, the penis going to the vagina. I don't mean that. I'm talking about that needs to happen. Yes, your biology. But when we were talking, and Duncombe was talking about it, something you were talking about in school in grade 6, hearing about the birds and the bees. I never remember hearing that conversation again in school.
That's true.
Never
That's true.
remember anybody saying
That's
to me,
true.
your body is valuable. And I heard it in church because,
Yes.
Pentecostals, purity is purity. You understand what I'm saying? Hello. That's a big topic. And that's always talked about. We talked about it in youth group. We talked about your body. My pastor used to say, you're beautiful. You're valuable. He took on that father figure. You know what I mean? Don't let any guy violate you. So those kinds of conversation we had, but in regards to school, I never remember hearing it again.
That's true. That is true.
Even about making good choices,
Making good choices, I never heard it again.
That is true.
So how we're dropping the ball with that. We're dropping the ball, making good choices. We're dropping the ball, and I think we're just throwing in the towel and saying, okay, this is a problem that won't go away, so let's not deal with it.
Yeah, and then we end up with the blame game. It's like we blame the parents. Oh, it's the parents' fault. They
blame the
them.
school,
and then the parents blame somebody else, the other parent.
Yes.
It's things hard. I even saw somebody blame the school. They're like, well, why the school wasn't checking on her? And I was like, well, and this is what an educator said to me. Like I said, that one of my educator friends that I spoke to, who was an administrator, she said in her school. Because she knew it, right? if a child was not to school for 2 days, because sometimes that's what happened when they are, if something is happening to them in appropriate home, sometimes they're
Yeah.
absent for periods of time. She said if
Yes,
it's the
that's a
second
sign.
day,
That's a
if it's the
sign.
second day,
Yeah.
she would
Mhm.
call,
Mhm.
or the teacher would call. I don't know that every administrator and every teacher is having that same, has had that same training, that if two, because that was the first time I heard it, right? But again,
Wow.
I dealt with younger children. So
Yeah.
it never came, like, if our, kids aren't required by law to be in preschool or
Right.
kindergarten.
Yeah.
But in the upper primary and high school, definitely, if there's 2 days that goes by and you don't see the children, is there an active thing to call the parent to see what's happening? But yes, society then says, oh, well, I heard them saying, but what about the school and da 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 da, and then what about the church? This is church for and
Yeah.
listen. I grew up in the church, but I got plenty fire for the church right now, because we live silent about this. We live too
Right.
silent about this for my liking.
Yeah.
And as somebody who grew up in the church, I saw some stuff in there too.
Yeah.
Even though I was taught purity in church, there was some stuff going on in church. Now remember, bear in mind, I'm a girl, so girls are taught a certain lesson that boys aren't taught in a religious environment sometimes.
Yeah.
And so for us, again, if you are part of the church, there needs to be a little bit more conversation on
I
this.
agree.
Okay,
Yeah.
you need to talk to, because there are some people that are your colleagues that you need to address. That's my take on that. But there's a lot of blame to go around, and I do think that at this point, like you have said, Miss Bassett, and like Miss Duncombe has said, we literally, there needs to be a PR campaign at this point about disseminating information, destroying myths, making sure that our children are safe, making sure that our children are in an environment where they can at least know someone cares enough about me.
Yeah.
Because I just don't feel like we doing that. I feel like
I
when
agree.
stuff like this happens, we throw them to the wolves.
Yeah.
And we take it for granted that they get the same education, training, love that your child gets if you are a parent that is active. And I feel like we have to do more to make the information, like you now that you've said it, Miss Bassett, it's true. I had that conversation in grade 6 and I never had it again. Bear in mind, I went to high school, I did general science, I did health science from 7 to 9. I never did biology because I was in the business stream. I went to a Catholic high school, so we didn't have religion, actually. Well, we had religion, but they didn't teach religion. They taught family life. They taught drugs, just they know the drugs. But I didn't find it to be very like, nothing that I could remember, honestly. I do remember we had a lot of pamphlets about drugs and a lot of pamphlets about sex. But not necessarily any great deep conversations about your value, about your body being your temple, mental preparation, like those kinds of active conversations.
Yes.
And so as
that's kids want to know why. Kids these days, they want to know why.
They want
why
to know
are you staying upstairs? Do you just want to stop my fun?
Yeah.
No, you see, so now they need to know why.
And you know what they would say is, like in having conversations with teens, be like, oh, Miss Moya, they call me Miss Moya because I was Miss Moya. When you was young, I used to do this too, and they try to do that. And I've even seen that conversation with some adults as well online about, well, back in the day, them girls used to catch the bus, and they used to be doing this and that, and the next thing. It doesn't matter what happened back in the day.
Right.
We're talking about what should be happening and getting in alignment with protecting our children, boys and girls,
and addressing this
from it
issue
happening as we move forward.
Yes.
That is what we need to focus on.
Yes.
We need to focus on, this is what should happen, this is what the law states, and this is what we need to move forward in making sure that it doesn't happen. So I want to thank you, Ms. Bassett. I want to thank you, Ms. Duncombe. I want to thank you, Ms. Hunt. As I further explore the topic, I may invite you guys back. I totally enjoyed this conversation tonight. If anyone has any closing words, we may have a few minutes on the clock.
And I think Duncombe said, I think it's all of us have to take on that mantle and that mandate to be able to, in our circles, to be able to teach young people why sex is important and why it's good and positive to wait. I think if all of us take it on and we stop throwing the blame on someone else, and take on the mantle of doing that with every child we meet, to be able to mentor them and also lead by example.
I think too, it's important to say to other adults,
Mhm.
listen, it's not okay.
It's
Even
not
if
okay.
it's something that happened in your
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
to you, it's unfortunate, and I'm sorry you didn't have who you should have had, but it's not okay.
not
It wasn't
okay.
okay then, and it's not okay now.
Yes.
And that's just period. That's just it.
And I do
Agreed.
think that is something that people deal with, not wanting to feel like a victim. Like it happened to them,
Mhm.
but they kind of rationalize it because they don't want to feel like a victim
Exactly.
of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the forum tonight. I had a awesome time talking with you ladies, and I just want to encourage all of us to continue to keep up the conversation, especially during this month. It is Child Protection Month, and so many advocates will be speaking, especially during this month, about issues relating to child protection. And I want to encourage everybody who's out there who's listening to um, continue to report and continue to discuss these matters. And if there's anything that brings you suspicion, let somebody know, you know. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the most recent case that brought this back into the forefront. But I want us all to remember that the only reason that we're talking about this is because someone actually called the police and gave them the anonymous tip, so that they could take action. So no more of these cases. Cases won't come to light like this unless we discuss it, or unless the person who knows something says something. So that's the final word I want to leave with you ladies today. Keep up the good work and keep encouraging people to say what they know, so that
Yeah.
we can continue to, get to the bottom of these matters and bring these matters to light, so that the children who are being involved in this can be, dealt with
Protected.
and protected. That's
Yes.
right. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Thank you for coming on. Thank you, ladies, so much. Until next time.